Are you lonesome tonight? Do you miss me tonight? Are you sorry we drifted apart? Does your man...
Hi, everybody.
We are back for another episode of Significant Lovers. Thanks for joining us.
Yep, we are not the lovers. We are the cousins. I am Mel.
And I'm Kel.
This is a podcast about true love. I want to say before we get into the episode, this episode is coming out in May. This summer, starting in June, we're going to be going on a little break for 2 months.
Yep.
Just for the summer, you know, rest, refresh, get our juices flowing, what couples we want to cover next in season 3. And so we are going to pause our Patreon. So any patrons listening, you will not be charged for all of June and all of July. So you don't have to worry about it. You don't have to do anything. You can just stay subscribed and you'll be able to listen to older episodes without being charged for those 2 months. And any new listeners, if you would like to subscribe, if you do so before June 1st, you will get to listen to all of our existing Patreon content for just the price of $5. So 2 months for the price of one. Unfortunately, nobody can subscribe because Patreon is like, I don't know.
Yeah, for some reason when we pause payments, new people cannot subscribe. So before June, we have until June, people, to sign up if you want to. Yeah.
And
otherwise,
if you're already
have to
signed
wait
up
till August.
If you're already signed up, don't go anywhere. You don't have to do anything. But if you want to sign up, you have until June 1st to do so. Or you'll have to wait until August.
I think that was well said. I hope that makes sense.
I hope so. Yeah. And, you know, we have a lot of good couples on our Patreon.
We do.
Brad Pitt and Angelina Jolie. Pete Davidson and Ariana Grande.
Phoebe Bridgers.
Paul Mescal. Drake and Rihanna.
I'm trying to think.
I know. I'm drawing a blank
Some
here.
of them I can't remember if they're Patreon or...
Me too. Miley
public.
Cyrus and Nick Jonas.
Yes. I thought you were going to say Mick Jagger.
I could picture
Miranda Lambert, Blake Shelton. So many. Half of our episodes.
Yeah. And a lot of good ones. But today's episode is a more historical episode. It is a story of forbidden romance. Ooh.
The most exciting kind.
I know. And we're talking about the royal family today. I was very much inspired. I've been rewatching The Crown and was super inspired to learn more about this couple because they're only touched upon briefly in season 1, and that is Prince Edward VIII, briefly known as King Edward VIII, and Wallis Simpson.
Wow.
Wallis. That is such a... Never mind. I don't want to be mean.
Unique first name?
Unique first name, yeah.
For a woman, at least.
But the 3 words I would use to describe this couple would be forbidden, obviously, indulgent, and selfish.
Oh. Sounds like Elizabeth Taylor.
Yeah, no. We're talking about people who cannot control themselves.
Oh my gosh. I'm so excited.
Yeah.
I wanted us to cover them, so I'm happy we're doing it.
There's a lot to it, and I feel like there's some very common narratives about them, but when you look under the surface, like, it's like, I don't know.
Interesting.
But yeah, so who were they? Edward VIII is also known as Edward Albert Christian George Andrew Patrick David.
Wow.
Okay, like we got a little bit of everything in there.
How many names is that?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 names.
Oh my gosh.
I know. I was like looking at it. I was like, literally 3 of these names, actually only 2, are like cousin names, but like how many names do you have people in your family in this one name, you know? But so Edward Albert Christian George Andrew Patrick David was born June 23rd, 1894 as the heir to the United Kingdom for the royal throne. He was the great-grandson of Queen Victoria, the reigning monarch at the time, and was third in line for the throne after his father, George V, Duke of York, and his grandfather, Edward VII, Prince of Wales at the time.
Okay.
And his mother, Mary, was the daughter of Queen Victoria's first cousin, the Princess of Cambridge, and her husband, which would make her, like, cousins with his dad. Like, cousins twice or 3 times removed. So it's like, far enough away that... I mean, I still wouldn't do it, but it's like, it was normal for the family.
I still wouldn't do it, but...
yeah. But they're not first cousins. So Edward was the oldest of 6 children, and they were apparently all spoiled by their grandfather, Edward VII. And they had a really good relationship with their grandfather. Like our Prince Charles episode, this was an early episode, we covered Charles and Camilla, another forbidden romance. Check it out if you're interested. Like Prince Charles, Edward was raised by nannies most of the time, but his parents, especially his father, were pretty affectionate when they were around, but they were often off on royal duties, and at that time they just didn't see the caretaking as their responsibility.
Sounds like Charles.
Yeah. And so, like, you have to wonder what that does to a child, to not get that affection that much when you're young by your parents who are supposed to be the people who are taking care of you.
And probably not knowing when you'll see your parents next. I mean, I'm sure there's calendars and schedules, but I don't know. I feel like that would be unpredictable for a kid.
And as we know from psychology, the way your relationships with your parents heavily influence your romantic relationships later on.
Yes.
So we always got to keep that in mind when it comes to these couples.
That's why we start before they meet.
Exactly.
What happened to them?
So Edward, it's just so nice to say that name, isn't it?
Edward. Ed. You know what I didn't really realize? Maybe this is silly of me, but I didn't realize that Edward is such an old name, like a medieval name.
I know.
It has stood the test of time.
I wonder if I would name my son Edward after Twilight. I think I would.
It's a very regal sounding name.
Edward.
You know, handsome.
Honestly, I think I will.
Do it.
Edward. I never really... Guys, this is because of Twilight, obviously.
We used to host a Twilight podcast. Yeah. In case you didn't know, another bite of Twilight.
Yeah, it has nothing to do with Edward VIII. He was homeschooled by tutors, and when he was 6 years old, his great-grandmother, Queen Victoria, died. And he was essentially placed under the care of 2 tutors at the time, 2 men named Frederick and Henry. And his school schedule was very aggressive and very strict. And then he started the Navy training at a college at age 13. And college, I think, is like what they call high school over there.
Yeah.
To prepare to enter the Royal Navy. Apparently, he wasn't the best student at school, though, and kids would often tease him for being a prince, which is also similar to Prince Charles.
Yeah,
like,
that
guys,
also happened to Charles.
Does no one care? He's gonna rule you someday? Like...
I know. I think they just wanted to knock him down a peg or a couple pegs, but it is strange.
I don't think that would have happened in my hometown. I think everybody would have been sucking up to him.
I know.
So when Edward was 15, his grandfather died and his father ascended the throne. And Edward then automatically became the Duke of Cornwall.
Wow.
And then on his 16th birthday, he was made the Prince of Wales and Earl of Chester. So he's like Prince William, basically. And now that he's first in line for the throne as a teenager, he left the naval training to begin preparing to become a future king.
Wow.
So this involved him going to like college, but then he dropped out because he wasn't a really good student. And during his crowning ceremony, he had to wear the imperial mantle robe. And this is where you first start seeing that he's just like not really into the whole royal thing. He was really embarrassed to wear the robe. He thought that his friends at the Navy Academy would make fun of him, which is like,
guys,
dude,
he's
you're a prince.
the Prince of England.
Yeah.
Why do you care? Wow, it just shows anybody can be insecure.
Yes, seriously. And he just started to feel really unsettled and nervous about becoming the king and seemed uncomfortable by the expectations placed on him. And while he wanted to join the Navy, his father instead made him attend Oxford. As I said, he started going to college. And he just wasn't good in school, and he never got his degree. And after that, he joined the British Army in order to serve in World War I. And he was really eager to fight on the front lines, but the palace wouldn't allow it. So he just kind of like met people, shook their hands. He was there for moral support, which the soldiers really appreciated. So he was really popular among veterans.
That's nice.
Yeah, that's nice. I will say one thing that makes me wonder about his character. When he was 24 years old, Edward's youngest brother, John, died of a severe epileptic seizure at just 13 years old.
Oh, no.
And Edward was extremely insensitive about his brother's death, writing in a letter to a mistress at the time. John's been practically shut up for the last 2 years anyhow, so no one has ever seen him except the family, and then only once or twice a year. This poor boy had become more of an animal than anything else, and he called his brother's death a little more than a regrettable nuisance, which...
Oh my gosh.
Dude, like, that makes me really question his character.
Before the nuisance thing, I wondered if maybe he was just being factual and saying, you know, like, nobody really cared about him. But then to say that his death is a nuisance, what the heck?
I know, seriously.
Oh, that's so sad.
Makes him seem like he's really cold and insensitive. And then apparently he also wrote something really insensitive in a letter to his mom about his brother's death. We don't know what he said. The letter was lost, and it seems like she never responded, but we do know he must have said something because he wrote a follow-up letter that says, "I feel like such a cold-hearted and unsympathetic swine for writing all that I did. No one can realize more than you how little poor Johnny meant to me, who hardly knew him. I feel so much for you, darling mama, who was my mother."
What is
who
the
was
point
his mother.
of even saying
I know, seriously.
that? Just write that in your journal. Why do you have to tell that to your mother?
So he's like apologizing. He's like saying like, I feel like such a cold-hearted swine for writing all that I did. He's like saying, oh, Johnny meant a lot to me, even though I hardly knew him. Okay, what did you write to your mom? Like, why did you write a long letter, like, saying something bad about the boy? Her own child passed away. Like, that's just weird to me.
That is strange.
So, makes me wonder about him. But after the war, Edward did a lot of traveling on the behalf of the royal family, and his single status made him a bit of a heartthrob at the time. The 1920s was definitely the height of his popularity, and he, at that point, was actually the most photographed celebrity in the whole world. He was particularly really liked by Americans who saw him as a style icon, and he loved Americans back. He was getting really into American culture and American fashion, would have clothes shipped to him overseas, and he would practice speaking in an American accent.
What? No way. I do like the accents from the 20s.
Yeah. I know, yeah. It's not like our dialect now.
I've never heard of an English person wanting an American accent.
No. But he was seen as more of a Hollywood celebrity than a traditional monarch. He was frequently talked about in the press, especially about different flings that he was having with different women, especially married women, which his family really wasn't happy about.
What is up with that?
I know. I think, like, it must be something about he likes the chase. He likes what is unattainable to him. Why do people go after people who are in relationships? I mean,
more than once.
More than once. I feel like if it happens once, it might be because you think, like, this is just such a special connection. And, but if it happens repeatedly, I think that's because there's some type of power gain there that you're chasing.
Yeah, it's weird. Like, we're even meeting all these married women. Like, aren't you going to bars with single women? I don't know. It's just strange.
So true. It seems like he was doing it habitually too. And also just like out in the open. Like he would just like go to events with a wife of somebody, and it's like, okay, what does the husband think?
Okay.
So yeah, in his early 20s, he was spending a lot of time partying in Paris, and he had a romance with a French sex worker named Marguerite Albert. And he broke it off with her after a year. And then around 5 years later, she was charged with murder and then acquitted. But she apparently had fatally shot her husband.
Oh, my God.
Must have been self-defense if she was acquitted. But the royal family desperately tried to make sure that the papers didn't mention Edward in association with this case at all. But it just goes to show, like, he's, like, really causing problems for the royal family. Like, they haven't had a guy like this. And his parents, they were raised in the Victorian era. So they have, like, very strict, like, pious, prude values.
This would be shocking. I mean, it's shocking regardless, I think, to be connected to something like that. But, wow, yeah.
It's so interesting, though, because I feel like history is always repeating itself, because same with Harry. Like, he was such a party boy, and everyone's acting like it's, like, so new to the royal family. It seems like every generation has some type of rebel.
It's true. I think there always have been people like that.
That same year, Edward was also involved with a British socialite named Rosemary, and he actually even proposed to her. However, he broke it off with her because his family, the royal family, didn't like some of her relatives.
Oh.
Which is interesting. Later on, his family won't like the woman that he's with, and he doesn't let that stop him. But here, he's like, okay, you guys get your way. I don't know if that was hard for him or not.
I know, I wonder. It could be this time... Maybe he wasn't ready to get married anyway, or he wasn't really that sure, wasn't that serious. Or maybe the second time he's like, you already did this to me once.
Yeah.
Fuck you.
But see, if she was a socialite and, like, not married and not divorced, the family probably is like, oh, we should have just let him marry her.
I know.
Could have saved us all this embarrassment. And yeah, his relationship with his parents really wasn't good. He had other mistresses, which really concerned his father, and also the Prime Minister, Stanley Baldwin. It was particularly...
The Prime Minister? Why does he care?
The Prime Minister was, like, really concerned with Edward's
I guess it reflects poorly on the country. That's true.
It was... Yeah, it does. And, like, because... Like you said with the Charles episodes, like, if people start to lose faith in the royal family, then, like, the whole monarchy is at risk. And I guess, like, the Prime Minister, like, maybe that's not a huge loss for them. But, I mean, maybe it is, because it's, like, it has to do with the strength of the country. And, you know, people are concerned, like, how committed is he to the country when he's partying all the time and always leaving someone else's bed.
Womanizer.
He is a womanizer. Apparently, George, his dad, the king, said, after I am dead, the boy will ruin himself in 12 months.
Oh, wow.
He also apparently hoped to God that Edward would never marry and have kids, so that nothing would come between Edward's brother, Albert, and his daughter, Elizabeth, who we know as Queen Elizabeth, inheriting the throne. So he really preferred Albert, who later actually became known as King George VI. But, which is weird because they also had a brother named George. So, like, when he became king, he, like, changed his name to George.
It's so confusing.
That's his brother's name. I don't know why he couldn't have just been King Albert. I don't know why they're, like, weird about names. But King George, Edward's dad, was super worried about this. I feel like it, like, kept him up at night. And I would describe Edward, he was not really an intellectual, but he was very quick-witted and charming. It seems like he was a thrill seeker. He loved racing horses and flying planes. He was literally a short king. He was only 5'7".
Taller than Eddie Fisher.
True. Wait, how tall was he again?
I think he was 5'5".
Wow. Yeah. He's tall in comparison. People were shorter back then. I guess that's not that far back, but...
I don't know. I think it depends where. That wasn't even that long ago.
True.
Maybe.
I think people were shorter like 1,000 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
He's been described as reckless, rebellious, the people's prince, brave,
Ooh.
but also cold and deeply disturbed.
Oh,
so
deeply disturbed.
Yeah.
Just slide that one in at the end.
Yeah.
The people's prince.
Yeah.
Deeply disturbed.
I think people liked him because like he was fun, but
Yeah.
then it got to be too much. But who was Wallis Simpson? So she was born Bessie Wallis Warfield on June 19th, 1896 in Blue Ridge Summit, Pennsylvania. So she's an American. Her father, Teakle, I hope I pronounced that right.
How do you spell it?
Like T, like T-E-A, and then C-K-L-E. So it's like tickle, but with T.
Yeah.
He was the youngest son of a very popular flour merchant in Baltimore, and his dad was well known for running for mayor of the city in 1875. And her mother was the daughter of a stockbroker. It seemed like they came from a kind of wealthy family. One of her uncles was super, super rich. They weren't really rich themselves, but they knew people who were. And she went by Bessie Wallis growing up, like 2 names, but somewhere along the way she dropped the Bessie and just went by Wallis, which was her dad's middle name.
Interesting.
And yeah, I know, because Wallis to me is like kind of a masculine name. That's why I said it was unusual, but
and yeah, I guess that confirms it. I mean, it was her dad's middle name.
Yeah. And when Wallis was just 7 months old, her dad actually sadly passed away from tuberculosis. After that, she and her mother were very financially dependent upon her father's wealthy single brother, who they lived with in a 4-story house that they shared with Wallis's paternal grandmother for a few years. And then after that, her and her mom temporarily lived with her Aunt Bessie in Baltimore for at least a year until they moved into a house of their own.
Mel, you're going to Baltimore tomorrow.
I know.
Wow.
First time, shout out any Baltimore listeners. And then when she was just 12 years old, her mom remarried to a guy named John, and he was the son of a very prominent member of the Democratic Party. So, like, again, everyone's like the son or the brother of someone who, like, has wealth or connections. And as a teenager, Wallis's rich uncle paid for her to attend a very expensive all-girls school in Maryland, where she made friends with a lot of heiresses and socialites. And she was described by her classmates as being exceptionally bright, driven, and well-dressed. The biographer Philip Ziegler wrote, "Though Wallis's jaw was too heavy for her to be counted beautiful," which, okay, kind of mean, her fine violet blue eyes. Wait, that's so weird. Another person described as having violet eyes.
I've never even seen that in real life, though.
Me neither. I don't buy it.
Violet eyes.
I don't think it's real. You can even Google it. Like, there won't be any real photos of people with violet eyes. But that's so weird. A shorter man with a woman with violet eyes.
Oh my gosh.
Both lacking self-control and being prone to adultery. 2 weeks in a row.
Eddie Fisher and Elizabeth Taylor. All over again.
So interesting. But yeah, her violet blue eyes and petite figure, quick wits, vitality, and capacity for total concentration on her interocular ensured that she had many admirers. And she did. She first got married at age 20 to a man named Earl Weinfeld Spencer Jr. Interesting, Spencer, like also, you know, kind of connected to the royal family, that last name. He was a U.S. Navy aviator who she met through her cousin, who was also in the Navy. But their marriage was pretty short-lived. It was very tumultuous, and her husband was a very heavy drinker and Wallis apparently would have affairs with other men. So that wasn't gonna work. I know, yeah. I was the reason why I said Wallis was because I was in my notes. I assumed like it was gonna be him for a second, and then I remembered nope, it was her. He must have been cheating too, though, maybe. At one point, she I don't know why, but she was like traveling a lot when she was young. Obviously, a lot of people travel, but like at that time, you had to like take boats, and it was really hard. So I don't know. She just was like living the life.
Wow.
And she spent over a year in China while she was married, but without her husband. And apparently she had an affair with an Italian diplomat and became pregnant, actually.
Oh my goodness.
This could be rumors, but they say that it resulted in a botched abortion that left her infertile. And when she got back to the U.S., she and her husband lived apart from each other, and then they officially divorced when she was 31 years old. And her very rich uncle at the time was so upset that she had gotten divorced that when he died, he only left her $15,000, which was pennies compared to the $5 million that she was expecting to receive from him. So she had to, find other means of getting money. And so she quickly remarried to a man named Ernest Simpson, who was a shipping executive and a former officer. He was also once divorced, and he had a daughter of his own. Wow. And they briefly lived in London together because his parents were from there, but then they traveled back to the U.S. when her mother was dying. And after she passed away, the couple moved back to England, and they had a pretty comfortable life. They lived in a house full of servants and were always associating with people of the higher class.
Wow. It's funny. I mean, maybe they're an exception, but you just think of like, the 1920s, whatever. Like people didn't really get divorced. Clearly they did.
No, yeah, seriously. I mean, they're both on their second marriages. I mean, I don't know. I feel like it's so funny with the royal family being like against divorce, because isn't the whole reason why like Protestant came to be is because the Protestant denomination of Christianity is because Henry VIII wanted to get divorced?
Okay, interestingly, I know, I have thought the same thing. I think that the reason they broke off was not really to make divorce accepted in the Church of England. It was more to not have to listen to the Pope.
Oh,
so that made the king in charge of the Church of England, so he could do whatever he wanted. But it didn't mean that all the other people could get divorced.
That makes sense. Yeah.
I know, but still. It's, I mean, that's in the fabric of the royal family.
Exactly. And then they're like so strict about it.
Yeah.
So when Wallis and Edward met at this time, so we're in 1931, Edward was having an affair with a different married socialite, an actress named Thelma Furness. And Thelma was throwing a house party at her country house in Borough Court, and after another couple got sick and had to cancel, she invited Wallis and Ernest because she had known Wallis through her sister, but just casually. Like, I think they had only met once before.
Okay.
And at the party, she introduced Wallis to Edward because apparently Wallis really wanted to meet him. And according to
the night they met.
It's literally the night they met.
Wow.
Apparently, according to the history press, Edward found Wallis sympathetic, understanding, and witty. And I have a clip of them later talking about the night that they first met.
Okay.
Simpson and I first met over a weekend at the House of Friends near Melton Mowbray in Leicestershire. She had a terrible cold and was not feeling or looking her best. Our first conversation was surprisingly stilted and banal, and it ranged from the lack of central heating in British country homes and the ruggedness of the British climate.
Mrs. Simpson had heard a song about the prince some time before.
I remember coming back from China. It was after the prince's trip to America. And there was this song then saying, I knew a girl who danced with the Prince of Wales.
Wallis Warfield Simpson had now been married to Ernest Simpson, her second husband, for 3 years. They lived in London, and that year Mrs. Simpson was presented at court.
I was struck by the grace of her carriage and the dignity of her movements.
After our first meeting, I didn't see him again until the following spring. Then we met occasionally in the houses of friends.
From the first, I looked upon her as the most independent woman I had ever met. And presently, the hope formed that one day I might be able to share my life with her. Just how, I did not know.
Wow, his accent is so posh.
I know.
And also,
Even
I
hers,
feel like hers isn't that different from
I know.
an English
I was thinking the same
accent.
thing.
Except she said, like, again,
Yeah.
which I don't even say that.
Maybe she kind of adopted an English accent.
Maybe.
Being married to him.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I feel like people spoke back then so much more formal than they do now that it sounds very British.
It does.
So a year after they first met, though, as they said, Wallis and Edward didn't see each other until Edward invited the couple, Wallis and Ernest, to dine with them in London. And they all became good friends, like couple friends, even though Edward and Thelma were not really an official couple because Thelma was married.
Oh my, that is crazy.
It's just weird. It's like, it's weird that Thelma was even throwing a party at Edward's place.
Yeah, and she's married.
What does your husband think about that,
I know.
girl?
It's crazy that they're going out on basically double dates.
Literally.
And socializing as a couple.
I don't get it. I really don't. But maybe if you just like have that much power, like you don't give a fuck. And after that, Edward invited the couple to spend a weekend at his country house in Fort Belvedere. Soon after, staff and family members grew very suspicious that something was going on between the two, but Edward denied that anything was happening while she was still married at this time.
It is interesting he keeps inviting them.
I know, seriously. In 1933, he was still seeing Thelma, but was becoming more and more infatuated with Wallis, and even threw her a 37th birthday party.
Whoa.
It's also interesting that they're like in their late 30s. He's like damn near 40, and it's just interesting that this is all happening when they're like getting closer and closer to middle age too. Like it seems very immature.
I know. I would have thought they were in their 20s.
I know.
What?
And then she threw a 4th of July party and invited him to her house that same year. And he probably was like, yeah, 4th of July.
Oh, okay. They're at parties.
I love America.
Yeah, they're probably like looking across the room at each other.
And then around this time, Thelma, his lover, sailed off to the U.S. and lived there. So Edward began putting all of his attention onto Wallis and was just falling more and more in love with her. And he was very attracted to the fact that it seemed like she didn't really care about him being the prince.
That's the way to a prince's heart, apparently.
Exactly. But it tells me again that he likes the chase. Like, this is kind of a game to him. And around this time, Wallis's husband, Ernest, was having some financial problems. So Edward would shower Wallis with clothes and jewelry and other expensive things, which at the time Wallis's husband didn't seem to have a problem with.
That's
I don't know.
Strange.
Yeah.
A guy
Also,
getting your wife jewelry? I would be worried.
Yeah. And I think like the king really had a problem with it because this is taxpayers' dollars.
True.
Like all of his money comes from the people of England. And if people find out that he's doing these things, they're really going to lose trust in the monarchy.
True. Dude.
So, yeah, but he can't control himself. So, Edward, he wanted Wallis to meet his family, even though she's literally married.
Are they together at this point?
They're like having an affair,
Okay.
but she's still with her husband. So he's denying that anything is happening. Like he's telling his dad, "Oh no, like we're just friends." But he brings Wallis to his brother George's wedding. And the king was really not cool with this. He did not want Wallis to come, and he even had her removed off the guest list, but Edward somehow still managed to bring her anyway. But actually, Ernest also came with her. I don't know where Ernest is during the wedding when Edward and Wallis run off with each other.
What? So they're sleeping together at this point?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure.
Wow.
I don't know for sure, like 100%, but I think it's implied.
It does remind me of Charles and Camilla, because Camilla was often not allowed at things too.
Yeah. It's weird that the royal family didn't learn their lesson by then. At least Camilla was divorced, I'm pretty sure. Like it wasn't like an affair until Diana came along, right? Like they had their window of opportunity. Oh yeah.
Husband.
You're right. God.
Trying to remember back to that episode, but anyway.
apparently when Wallis met the king and queen, it was pretty pleasant. Like, obviously they weren't going to have a fight right there, but afterwards the king demanded that she not be invited to any more royal events at all. But Edward doubled down and became insistent that she came, becoming just obsessed with Wallis. And that November, he took her on a very public ski trip to Austria and bought her a $60,000 or 60,000 pound worth of jewelry.
Wow.
Which is crazy. It's almost like his dad telling him no, he just wanted to be with her more.
It's childish. Mm-hmm. But I know, but then it's like, oh, is it true love or is he just being childish?
Okay, like that's my thing about it is I think this common narrative with this couple is like, oh, he fell in love with a twice divorcee and the royal family wouldn't let him be with her, but he did everything he could to be with her anyway. Mm-hmm. But it's a little bit less romantic that he had a habit of getting with married women. He wasn't with a twice divorcee. He was with a once divorcee, currently married woman.
True. And he had been with married women before.
Exactly. So it's like, I feel like it's less about true love and more about the power gain here.
That's a little upsetting.
He just wants, yeah, I know. He just wants what he can't have, it seems.
Well, I appreciate you telling us the truth, Mel.
I mean, who knows? Like, you know, they did, spoiler, they were married for the rest of their lives, but I don't know. The king is pissed, but Edward keeps denying to him that anything romantic is happening or sexual, but somehow he keeps bringing her to stuff, and it's just pretty obvious. He's crazy. So then it's 1936, January. Edward finds out through his mother that his father is in poor health, and he flies to be by his bedside. And the king then died only a few days later on January 20th, making Edward the King of England. Oh boy, he is not ready for this.
Oh my gosh. But he's not even that young.
No, he's not. But he's like living like a bachelor. He's partying all the time. He doesn't give a fuck about anything other than like sex and I don't know. I'm sure he's doing drugs and like drinking a lot. This is rough for him. I don't think he even really wants to be king. So he calls Wallis and he tells her the news. And then in October of that year, she officially filed for divorce from her husband so that they could be together.
That's interesting.
Soon after, I know, yeah. Soon after that, the Prime Minister, Stanley Baldwin, met with Edward, and he warned him that a public relationship with Wallis would be a bad look for the country and that he should just keep her as a mistress. And he also strongly urged Edward to prevent Wallis and her husband from divorcing.
Stanley Baldwin.
Edward obviously refused to not break up the marriage, to keep Wallis and Ernest together, and he told the Prime Minister that he really wanted to marry Wallis, but the Prime Minister said that the people of England would never accept her. And meanwhile, it was believed at the time that the establishment, like the royal family, believed that Wallis was more driven by money and power rather than true love. So they were very suspicious of her. Interestingly, later on, Wallis actually blamed her divorce on Ernest, on him being unfaithful, but obviously she wasn't.
Yeah. Maybe he was unfaithful, but so was she, so.
And a little context here, the world was on the brink of another world war, so it was a very bad time for the king's commitment to the crown to be in question at all.
True.
You know, they had to have a very strong united front here and like just be role models for the country. And Edward's secretary apparently wrote to him and said, "The silence in the British press on the subject of your majesty's friendship with Mrs. Simpson is not going to be maintained. Judging by the letters from British subjects living in foreign countries where the press has been outspoken, the effect will be calamitous."
Oh, wow.
So, I mean, he's the king. And if he gets with a twice divorced woman who it's very obvious he had an affair with, it might look bad to other countries at the time. Not that I think that there's anything scandalous about being divorced, but at this time I can see why it was a concern for the family. And they're apparently panicking over there in England. about this relationship.
You're panicking.
Yeah, and they're actually having police detectives follow Wallis and Edward and spy on them, which, again, very similar to Charles and Camilla.
Yeah, they were spied on as well.
So, I mean, clearly this family has a history of that. And if they don't like someone, they will make it known. And it's just so interesting because I feel like it must be so hard to be accepted by this family. You know, we have Camilla and also Diana and also Meghan Markle. Like,
it's hard.
Talk about pressure.
Even normal families, I think it can be hard to bring people into a family. But this one is very, very particular.
I wonder if they would accept me.
Oh,
probably not.
They better.
But people in the palace started to believe that Edward was sexually abnormal, quote, and it seems like I feel weird talking about this, but like he maybe definitely had a fetish for women who were more sexually dominant than him, and that I feel weird, but that Wallis maybe held over him some type of dominance, and people were speculating, I don't know if this is true, that maybe she had learned some type of practices in a Chinese brothel.
What practices?
I don't know. This is what the people were saying.
How did they know this?
I don't know. But so, I mean, it does seem like maybe there's something to that. Like, he liked what he couldn't have. He liked that she didn't care about him. He liked a woman to demean him in some way. He got off on that. I don't know. He liked power dynamics where he was a little subordinate. I don't know. You know, we weren't there. There's no way to say. But also, again, the royal family, they might be planting these stories in the press to make Wallis look bad.
That story makes him look weird.
Oh, yeah, no, it does make him look weird. But they also, apparently there were stories that she was having affairs with other men, too. Not just Edward.
But we don't know if that's true or not.
No, we don't know. So then in December, Edward has only been king for several months. How many months? Let's see. A little less than a year, 11 months.
Okay.
Edward signed his abdication papers to step down from the throne. Huge sacrifice here. He said in his statement, "I have found it impossible to carry the heavy burden of responsibility and to discharge my duties as king as I would wish to do without the help and support of the woman I love." Which, it is very brave of him to do that. And I was thinking a lot of like, why didn't Charles just do that? But
well, he wasn't even king.
Yeah, you're right. He wasn't king. But also, I understand too, like, the duty to your country, and if you've been raised to believe that it is your responsibility to inherit the throne your whole life, there's one of two ways that could go for someone. And like, I think Edward just like never even really wanted to be king in the first place, and so he was looking for an excuse.
Yeah, I do think Charles really wanted it and was preparing for decades. But wow.
I know.
He did it. He really did it.
He did it, and the next day, Edward's brother Albert became the king. Like I said, he then went by King George VI, and Edward went back to being a prince. Which honestly seems like not a bad life. Like, he still got an allowance, but he had a lot less responsibilities and could do what he wanted.
And he's still a prince. Which is cool.
And supporters of Edward, they blamed the Prime Minister for this. But most members of the royal family were actually pretty relieved that he stepped down.
Who's a supporter of Edward? No offense, but like, why would people really want him to be king?
Well, like I said, like, he was like very stylish. People were attracted to him, and you know, people who maybe didn't really like the monarchy in the first place liked him.
I see.
People like a rebel sometimes.
Yeah.
But you know, that's obviously bad for the country too, that now people are mad at the prime minister because of him stepping down.
And they think, oh my gosh, they made him do this. They wouldn't let him be with her.
And so, but like, I kind of get it. Maybe they should have just let him marry her. But again, at the same time, like, then maybe people wouldn't have accepted her, and it just was this whole thing.
Yeah.
So it's 1937. No, they wouldn't have. It would have been a mockery for the country.
They'd be like throwing tomatoes at her or something.
Yeah. And she was an American too.
Even worse.
So, 1937, Wallis's divorce from Ernest was finally officially finalized. And on June 3rd, the couple married at the Chateau de Condé in France on what would have been his father's 72nd birthday. Like, what a way to...
Oh, wow. His dad, who would not have approved.
No, he would not have. And the bride wore a blue dress, and none of the groom's family attended at all. And I think he was pretty hurt by that. I think he felt pretty rejected and
so
abandoned.
They were invited? Mm-hmm. And they didn't go?
No, they didn't go. But after they got married, Wallis, she became the Duchess of Windsor, but King George filed papers denying her the right to be called Her Royal Highness, which Edward was also pretty pissed about.
It's crazy how official everything is.
Yeah. So after they abdicated the throne, they were feeling pretty rejected by his family and honestly all of England. So Edward turned to Germany for support. And in 1937, he and Wallis traveled to meet Hitler.
Oh my God.
I know. This is why I don't sympathize for them, because they're honestly kind of Nazi sympathizers, and they took photos with Hitler.
Oh,
and afterwards,
no.
Edward wrote a very kiss-ass letter to him thanking him for his hospitality.
A kiss-ass letter.
Yeah, and then in 1939, he released a public address urging Britain to come to terms with Germany 4 months before the war broke out. So this is before the Holocaust has really started, before people really know of the extreme
maybe we can give him the benefit of the doubt.
You might think maybe he's naive here, but some people speculate that Hitler personally helped the couple flee to Portugal and put them in a really nice mansion.
Oh my
as the
God.
war was breaking out. I know. They actually were pretty close. And some historians think that, like I said, at best, that Edward was maybe naive about the direction that the Nazi Party was heading in. And maybe that they were also manipulating Edward because they saw that he had a reason to betray the royal family.
Oh my gosh, yeah. Seems
and
like a plot of a movie, the
I know.
evil
For
villain.
real.
Yeah.
For real. So honestly, no, it is, because then in 1945, a series of top secret documents were found in Germany that were allegedly documents of correspondence between Edward and Nazi agents. And in the documents, the Nazis are trying to convince Edward, they're trying to convince him to join them in order to help bring about peace negotiations with the UK. And in the letters, they are trying to manipulate Edward into thinking that his own brother, the king, and the prime minister were planning to assassinate him and were trying to convince him to stage a kidnapping in the Bahamas, which is where him and Wallis are living because he was given governance power of the Bahamas at the time.
Oh my gosh.
Stage a kidnapping in order to blackmail his family into joining forces with the Nazis. I don't know how this would work, honestly. Blackmail the royal family into joining forces with the Nazis.
Okay, so they're just lying to him, I'm guessing, about the assassination thing, and then they're saying, because this probably won't actually happen, but let's stage it and blame it on them. And
yes, yep, and they're trying to just basically forge a greater wedge between him and his family.
Don't fall for it.
Yeah, honestly, it seems like he does a little bit. He never accepts that plan, but the Nazis were also saying that, once they join forces or something, they would reinstate him as king, which I don't know how they would have power to do that, and also make Wallis the queen.
He doesn't even want that.
I know. That obviously doesn't happen. I know, yeah, he literally doesn't want to be king. But I think he wants Wallis to have some type of royal, that was a sore subject for him. Edward doesn't agree to that, but in one of his final letters to the Nazis, he suggested that they should bomb Britain.
What?
So, bomb his home country, bomb the country where his whole family lives.
What?
So bad. This is why I feel I can't be oh, this is a beautiful story, this couple.
Yeah, people definitely leave this out when they talk about them.
For real. Like, okay, he's that mad at his family that he is okay with them being bombed. Like, I'm sorry.
That's horrible.
Seriously, that's again deeply disturbed. He says it so in order for the Nazis in the UK to have peace negotiations, but oh gosh.
Is this mentioned on The Crown at all?
I don't think so. I've only watched like 5 episodes of season 1 though, which is mostly focused on Elizabeth.
Oh, okay. Wow. Holy crap.
It does seem like the Nazis were taking advantage of the fact that Edward felt so abandoned by his family. Yeah. So I can see how maybe there were possibly reasons why he wanted nothing to do with them. Mm-hmm. But that's just like extreme. And
that's
also
such
it's like
an overreaction.
Have some character here. Yeah. Like, and when I can see why his family also would want nothing to do with him.
What about all the innocent people of the country that has nothing to do with your family's beef?
Seriously.
What the heck?
The innocent people in the concentration camps. Okay, get over your stupid relationship. Who gives a fuck? I mean, this is just like, if you're taking it that personally, that you're like sympathizing with the Nazi party, like, I don't feel bad for you. I don't sympathize with your problems.
Yeah.
But I can also see why the royal family, I meant to say this, wanted nothing to do with him. They make it seem like, oh, like they just don't want to speak to him because they don't like his wife. Like, no, I think they also feel like he's kind of a traitor to the country and they can't trust him and he's a liability, so he's an embarrassment to them.
Yeah. I wonder if did he feel that the current government or everything should just be abolished? Like, did he like the Nazis' vision? He wanted England to adopt that? Like, did it go that far, or?
I'm not too sure about his politics in the context of that time, but I did read that he had very conservative beliefs for that time period.
I mean, I can see feeling like rejected and then feeling accepted by somebody else, but that's just too far, man.
Way too far.
I'm guessing they still had friends and such. Like,
yeah.
How could you be that? I don't know. I guess we have the hindsight to, I don't know. That's crazy.
Yeah. Yeah.
Literally Hitler.
No, yeah. The absolute worst person in the world to ever exist. So it goes back to like the thing he said about his brother, like his death being a nuisance. Like, I don't think that he seems to really value human life and people and other people's pain that much, so it's hard for me to feel for their story.
There's got to be something really detached to just think so casually about, not casually, but to just talk about bombing a country or it's
scary, and it's a good thing he wasn't king at the time, honestly. Huge blessing that didn't happen.
That's true.
Everything happens. Oh, just kidding. It's like actually so bad. But after abdicating the throne, Edward stayed married to Wallis for the rest of his life. But it wasn't really this great love story that it seems either. Historian Tracy Borman said, "Here's a myth that he had one of history's greatest love affairs, but it is a great myth. Giving up the throne for the love of a woman sounds incredibly romantic, but if you delve deeper into Edward's character and into his relationship with Wallis, you'll realize that it's not all as it appears. He was actually a very flawed character. He grew up with all sorts of insecurities. He was quite childlike when it came to women, and you definitely see that when it comes to his relationship with Wallis. She's almost like a mother figure to Edward." And this historian, Tracy, developed a Smithsonian docuseries called The Private Lives of Monarchs, where she did a lot of research into their personal lives and suggested that Edward never wanted to be king, and that because he made this big sacrifice, he expected a lot from Wallis in return, and that she felt a lot of pressure from that.
Because what can she even give him back?
Exactly.
That equals that. And it sounds like she maybe can't have children. That's just, I only mention that because that seems like the kind of thing that someone would maybe, I don't know, say. Like, you owe me something. I don't know. What can she do?
I know. This historian also said he just wanted her all to himself. He was quite suffocating when it came to his love for Wallis. That's why there were rumors of her having an affair to escape. It would have been disastrous for the monarchy. He just wanted to be in her company all the time, and it was very clear that for him, Wallis was everything. She was enough for him to give up the crown. It was a weight of responsibility lifted. But all of this must have felt like such a pressure for her to be everything that Edward wanted. He just wanted to be with her 24/7. They were hardly ever apart, and he quickly became quite jealous if she spoke to any other man. And that she goes on to say, ironically, this suffocating behavior actually drove her from him. They obviously never separated, but it really made her want to have space because he just was desperate to possess her entirely. He didn't know how to act around others. He just wanted what he wanted. And when the government told him he couldn't have Wallis, it became this huge obsession.
That's interesting. I feel like that really can cause, obviously, so much conflict and just tricky dynamics when somebody gives something up for the relationship. And I don't think that means it's, like, impossible to make it work. I think you just have to, like, really be honest about how you're feeling. And, yeah, I don't know. I can see him kind of, even if he didn't really want, deep down didn't want to be king, kind of this pressure he's putting on it. Like, I gave up everything for you. Like, this has to be, like, everything, you know? And almost having to prove to him. I mean, I'm kind of inserting my own vision here, but I can see him, like, doubling down on her, you know, that this is everything. And that's intense.
Oh, totally. Yeah. And I also think, I don't know if I can articulate this well, but I used to think that a relationship that starts with intensity, almost like it's a movie, that's what I wanted.
Yeah.
And that, like, it's because there's nothing more exciting that, like, once you get it, it's a resolution to something. And a forbidden romance is, like, the most intense thing that you can have. But then, like, once they're together, it's like, where do you go from there?
Yeah.
It's tough for a relationship to already start on such rocky grounds. And I feel if you're used to that intensity and it seems almost like he was addicted to that, then that probably manifests in other ways once they're together. Like, they're probably not just, like, sitting at home playing chess, doing a crossword, like, drinking tea. There's no way to know, like, what life behind closed doors was really like for them, but it probably wasn't idyllic, especially if there seems to be, like, he had a lot of pent-up anger towards people.
Yeah. And maybe him getting really jealous and possessive, that's, like, his way of, I mean, yeah, we didn't know them, but way of keeping it exciting, you know, almost like inventing little dramas. And I don't know. I mean, it sounds like she maybe did have an affair, but
yeah, but he maybe liked that. I hate to say it, but, like, he was always dating unavailable women.
That's true.
And women who were married. And so, like, how can you then just be happy with a woman who's, like, married to you?
Right.
There's no chase in that. So they totally don't portray him this way on The Crown, though. I feel like they make it seem like he just, like, sacrificed everything for the woman he loved, and the royal family just can't accept it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I don't know. I need to watch more episodes if they talk about his Nazi sympathizing ways. I mean, that's, like, truly unforgivable. So I have a feeling
scandalous.
I think that was, like, a bigger reason why the family didn't want anything to do with him. But they did interact with him somewhat. So after the Second World War, was basically retired, and they both just, like, lived as celebrities, but they did receive an allowance. And for extra money, he wrote a memoir called A King's Story, which basically he just, like, talked about his political beliefs. He occasionally still interacted with his mother, but the family never accepted Wallis. He visited his brother George's funeral, but chose not to attend his niece Elizabeth's coronation as the queen. He said, like, he thought it wasn't appropriate for a former reigning monarch to visit the coronation of another reigning monarch, but it's like that, like, literally never happens because usually people don't abdicate the throne.
True.
And he was only the king for a year.
Was it like a bad luck type of thing, or he thought he would outshine her or something?
Maybe.
Yeah, that was only 11 months.
I know. He, like, wants to remind people, like, I was king. And the last royal event that he ever attended was for his sister-in-law, Princess Marina, her funeral in 1968. And then his health began to decline, and he was diagnosed with throat cancer in his early 70s after years of heavy smoking. And apparently his niece Elizabeth came to visit him on a state visit to France, and she met with him for about 15 minutes. But then 10 days later, he died on May 28th, 1972, at the age of 77.
Wow.
And Wallis, she had a very hard time after his death. She became very physically frail and started developing dementia and suffered some pretty bad falls, which led her to breaking her hip twice.
Oh, wow. Oh, no.
Also, her lawyer at the time was made the power of attorney, but totally took advantage of Wallis and was very exploitative and would sell Wallis's personal items to her friends to make a profit. And it's really sad. She still received an allowance from the Queen, but nobody visited her. And towards the end of her life, she lost the ability to speak. And the only interaction she would have with other people would just be like nurses and doctors. She really had no family or loved ones around her at all.
Jeez, that's really depressing.
Yeah, she just lived basically in isolation from people.
Oh, even though I really hate that they hung out with Hitler.
Literally.
That is just really sad to hear.
I know.
About another human.
And then she died on April 24th, 1986 at age 89. But it's so odd because even though she never received any visitors and the royal family didn't accept her, they still had a funeral for her, which included her sister-in-laws and the Queen, Elizabeth, and Prince Philip and Prince Charles and Princess Diana. They all attended.
They were
and
there.
later Diana said this was the only time that she ever saw the Queen cry, which is weird. Like, she didn't even visit her.
Wow.
But yeah, that's the story. I feel like there's a lot more that I could have included in that, but
Well, that's always true. Oh, it's sad. Mixed
Sad,
feelings,
yeah.
but very
It's sad.
interesting.
it's sad because I wanted to root for them more.
Yeah.
And I just like couldn't. Once I saw the Hitler stuff, I was like, oh.
It sounds on the outside like such a romantic story.
I know.
I guess it was for them.
Yeah, for them. Well, but I guess like all love fluctuates as time goes on, and no relationship is like perfect, but
Yeah.
I don't know like how great they even were as a married couple.
They would have to stay together, though.
Oh, for sure.
This is
It'd
also
be super
what-
embarrassing.
This is also what I feel about Charles and Camilla, even though I do feel like they do really love each other, but it's just like after all of that,
Yeah.
you cannot break up.
Oh, no. Not at all.
No.
I mean,
and then you would look kind of crazy. Like, you would look
Yeah.
like you have no control, or you're just like running on your whims. And, you know, if you abdicate the throne and then and say it's to be with her, and then you don't even end up with her, like that would look poor, I think.
Oh, totally. I mean, it's kind of like an us against the world relationship, which,
True.
you know, we covered a few episodes back, the Taylor Johnsons.
That is a type.
Yes. And I feel like it does really bond a couple when everybody hates them together. And they want to prove the haters wrong by enduring, but maybe they ignore some problems along the
Yep.
way.
And us against the world. Well, thank you, Mel, for researching all of that. It's so interesting.
Thank you guys for listening.
Oh.
Next week on the Patreon, we will be covering a more modern-ish couple. Not really, but a couple decades ago. But
They're still around, though.
Yeah, still around, still people we know. This will mean nothing to you guys at all, but both these celebrities, I have a list in my phone of celebrities who I think not look like us per se, but look like they would be members of our family.
You should read that list next episode. I want to hear who's on it.
I should. I need to expand upon it a bit, but both these people are in that list. I think they both look like they could be a part of our family. Another hint that might work better for you guys is they both could be referred to by their initials, which would include 3 letters.
They both go by 3 names.
Yes.
Or is that too much
kind
of a hint? Too much of a hint.
I wouldn't say one of them is like 3 names per se. It's like 2 names and a suffix.
I guess.
Yeah. Guys, I feel like I'm practically telling you. I won't say anymore.
Well, thank you guys so much for listening. Tell us what you think of this couple. Do you ship it? Is it detestable?
I know, it's like hard.
Whose side are you on?
Yeah, it's hard for me to ship it. Like I went into this thinking that I would like hate the royal family for keeping like true love apart, and then I was like, like honestly, I can see why the royal family was annoyed with them.
Yeah. Well, we love you guys.
We love you, and we'll get back together next week.
The end.
Is your heart filled with pain? Shall